In the final years of the 19th century, as America's Gilded Age glittered with gold-plated wealth on the surface while hiding deep cracks beneath, the nation stood at a crossroads where capitalism itself seemed both unstoppable and dangerously unstable, because while titans like Rockefeller, Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, Vanderbilt, and Gould amassed fortunes so large they distorted the economy, millions of American workers lived in poverty, prices fluctuated wildly, railroads collapsed, monopolies suffocated competition, and political corruption reached levels that made ordinary citizens believe the entire system was rigged against them. And it was in this turbulent moment, fueled by inequality, exploitation, financial panics, and anger from farmers, laborers, and the rising middle class, that America was forced to rebuild its entire economic model, creating something more modern, regulated, and sustainable than anything the Gilded Age had known, beginning with the shock of the Panic of 1893, a financial catastrophe triggered by railroad overexpansion, shaky corporate debt, and collapsing gold reserves, which caused bank failures, mass unemployment, and a crisis so severe that even the U.S. government almost defaulted until J.P. Morgan himself lent the Treasury millions in gold, a moment that exposed a terrifying truth. America's financial system was so weak that one private banker had more power than the federal government, and this realization awakened a generation of reformers who believed capitalism needed rules, structure, and transparency to survive, paving the way for the progressive era, where journalists known as muckrakers exposed corporate abuses, citizens demanded fairness, and presidents like Theodore Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and later Woodrow Wilson reshaped the economy through a series of reforms designed to tame monopolies, protect workers, and stabilize money itself, starting with Roosevelt's trust busting, which targeted gigantic corporations like Standard Oil, Northern Securities, and meatpacking trusts, not to destroy capitalism, but to save it from becoming a playground for a few oligarchs, and as courts ordered breakups and forced competition back into markets, the government created new economic referees like the Interstate Commerce Commission, the Food and Drug Administration, and the Bureau of Corporations, each designed to make capitalism safer, cleaner, and more transparent, while the labor movement forced factories and industries to confront dangerous working conditions, child labor, and 14-hour workdays that had been normalized during the Gilded Age, and the cries for monetary reform grew louder as the country realized that relying on gold alone, with no central manager of the money supply, made financial panics inevitable, eventually leading to the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913, the most important economic transformation in American history after the Civil War, because for the first time the U.S. had a central bank that could expand or contract credit, stabilize interest rates, serve as lender of last resort, supervise banks, and act as the brain of the entire financial system, giving capitalism a structure that allowed it to grow without constantly collapsing under its own weight. While the rise of income taxes under the 16th Amendment created a new revenue system that shifted government away from tariffs and toward a modern fiscal structure that could support infrastructure, regulation, and public programs, and as America moved into the 20th century, massive immigration, urbanization, and industrial expansion created a new consumer economy where wages rose, mass production flourished, and capitalism shifted from an elite-driven to a middle-class-driven system, helped by Henry Ford's assembly line, which proved that paying workers better meant creating millions of new customers, essentially reinventing American capitalism from the inside out by transforming it into a cycle of production, consumption, wages, and demand, while antitrust laws like the Clayton Antitrust Act and regulatory bodies like the Federal Trade Commission ensured that companies could compete without crushing each other or exploiting consumers, and reforms like workers' compensation, minimum wage laws in some states, corporate disclosure rules, and banking reforms made the economic system more predictable and less chaotic, but America's rebuilt capitalism was fully tested during the Great Depression. When the financial system crashed again, unemployment soared, and capitalism itself seemed to be collapsing, forcing the government to expand its role further through Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal, which did not destroy capitalism, but reinvented it yet again through deposit insurance, social security, stock market regulation, housing finance reform, and public works projects that pumped money into the economy, creating the foundation for mid-20th century prosperity, and by the end of World War II, America had emerged with a unique model of capitalism, neither fully laissez-faire nor fully government-controlled, but a hybrid system built on regulated markets, active government oversight, strong financial institutions, and a thriving private sector capable of incredible innovation. And this rebuilt version of capitalism allowed the United States to dominate the global economy, create the modern middle class, and become the world's economic engine, because after the Gilded Age showed the dangers of extreme inequality and unchecked corporate power, America responded not by abandoning capitalism, but by repairing it, rebalancing it, and building the legal, financial, and institutional structures that allowed ordinary people, not just tycoons, to participate in wealth creation, turning capitalism from a system that worked for the few into one that could support millions. And even though new challenges would emerge in the decades to come, from deregulation to globalization to technological revolution, the blueprint created in the aftermath of the Gilded Age, the regulatory agencies, the Federal Reserve, antitrust policy, labor protections, financial transparency, and a belief that markets must be supervised rather than left completely alone, remains the foundation of modern American capitalism, proving that the U.S. did not simply survive the chaos of the Gilded Age. It reinvented the rules of money, power, and markets in a way that reshaped the world and built the economic system we recognize today. And yet the story of how America rebuilt capitalism after the Gilded Age does not end with the creation of regulatory agencies or even with the rise of the New Deal, because the true transformation was not only political or institutional, it was cultural, psychological, and deeply tied to how Americans began to understand money, opportunity, fairness, and the purpose of an economy itself. For after decades of living through monopolies, financial panics, economic collapses, and vast inequalities, Americans slowly adopted a more sophisticated belief that capitalism could be engineered, adjusted, and guided like a machine, rather than treated as a chaotic force of nature. And as economists, politicians, and business leaders debated how much control government should have over markets, the modern American idea emerged. Capitalism thrives best not when it is left wild, but when it is managed to ensure competition, stability, and long-term growth. Which is why the post-Gilded Age period became a laboratory of ideas. Public banking reforms, corporate governance rules, wage standards, price regulations, social insurance programs, and new legal frameworks that forced businesses to operate in ways that balance profit with responsibility. And as America moved through the 20th century, the system evolved further, especially after World War II, when the GI Bill pumped money into education and housing, helping millions of ordinary families buy homes, build wealth, and enter the middle class, dramatically expanding the base of people participating in capitalism and turning mass consumption into the engine of national growth, while the government invested in highways, science, technology, and military research, creating industries, from aerospace to electronics, that redefined the global economy. And even during the Cold War, when ideological battles raged between capitalism and communism, America strengthened its version of regulated capitalism through institutions like the IMF, World Bank, and GATT, which promoted global trade and financial stability, enabling U.S. companies to expand abroad while supporting domestic prosperity at home. And though inequality never fully disappeared and periodic crises continued, such as the recessions of the 1970s, inflation shocks, and eventual deregulation waves, the underlying structure built after the Gilded Age endured because it gave policymakers tools to guide the economy, such as central banking power, antitrust enforcement, labor rights, and market transparency, allowing capitalism to adjust to new realities. And by the time America entered the digital age, the legacy of post-Gilded Age reconstruction could be seen everywhere. In the startup ecosystem fueled by accessible credit and regulated markets, in the stock market protected by disclosure laws, in consumer confidence supported by legal protections, and in the very idea that economic opportunity should not depend on the whims of a small elite, but be distributed across society through education, entrepreneurship, homeownership, and innovation. Yet the most fascinating part of America's rebuilt capitalism is that it has continually reinvented itself. Through the shift from industrial to financial capitalism in the late 20th century, through globalization that moved manufacturing overseas, through the rise of Silicon Valley that transformed technology into the new source of wealth, and through the 2008 financial crisis, which, much like the panics of the Gilded Age, exposed weaknesses caused by deregulation, risky debt, and lack of oversight, leading yet again to reforms such as Dodd-Frank, tighter banking rules, consumer protection laws, and new financial stress tests designed to stabilize capitalism for the next generation, proving once more that whenever American capitalism grows too fast, too unequal, or too unstable, the country returns to the formula learned after the Gilded Age: rebalance the system, regulate the excesses, rebuild public trust, and redesign the rules so the economy can keep expanding without imploding. And this long cycle, from the Gilded Age monopolies to the progressive reforms, from the New Deal to the post-war boom, from the deregulation of the 1980s to the digital transformation of the 2000s, reveals a profound truth. The strength of American capitalism does not come from being rigid, but from its ability to evolve, absorb shocks, integrate new ideas, and use crises as opportunities to upgrade the entire economic structure, ensuring that the pursuit of money, growth, innovation, and wealth remains anchored in a system that can survive its own success. And as America faces the future, with AI reshaping labor, automation transforming industries, and global competition rising once again, the lessons learned in the aftermath of the Gilded Age remain more important than ever. Capitalism must be guided by rules that protect people, foster competition, prevent concentration of power, and keep financial systems stable, because without these guardrails, prosperity collapses into chaos, but with them, capitalism becomes one of humanity's most powerful engines for progress, mobility, and transformation, which is exactly how America, through trial, error, crisis, and reinvention, rebuilt its economic system from the fragile chaos of the Gilded Age into the complex, dynamic, resilient capitalist powerhouse that continues to shape the modern world today.